Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Skating Penguin Network Mailbag here at the Skating Penguin Network. I am Garrett Bahana. Alongside me for this edition of the Mailbag is Snail. Robbie is out for this edition. I believe he will be back later in the week for part two of this week's Mailbag. But in the interim, it is Snail and I. We are answering more of your questions from this week's mailbag and as well as last week's mailbag, because last week's mailbag was a chonky boy. So there are definitely some questions that have carried over from last week's mailbag into this week, as well as some newer questions from this week's mailbag tweet as well. So uh, with Robbie not being here, he has graciously sent us his answers to the questions that were supposed to be his. So I guess, Snail, I will take Robbie's first question and we can just go back and forth and answer Robbie's questions as we go along. Question one comes from Brian for Robbie. If you could be added to one text chain, who would it be with? And Robbie goes on to say, there are so many good options here. Obviously, seeing the Penguins group chat and all the banter throughout the season would be very fun and I'm sure enlightening. Texting didn't exist back then, but way back in the day, to old rock bands like the Beatles or Queen, we all know about the drama, but seeing it play out in real time would be crazy. You just know how super petty all of that would have been. I'm sure there are tons of listeners just dying to see I'm reading this for the first time. I'm sure there are tons of listeners just dying to see the Penscast group chat as well. And Snail, I guess the both of us can speak to how enlightening and riveting our group chat can be from time to time.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, at times it's like very unhinged, like a lot of like just really dumb things being shared and then like it's like probably 90% that 10% like actual useful information that we need to like communicate to each other, like for example Robbie letting us know, like if you look at the group chat right now you'll see Robbie saying sorry I can't make it today, and above that it's just like I'm sending them like Chris Pronger highlights. I'm sending them tough old time hockey saying Garrett can't comprehend this. There's memes where people are getting offended saying you need you might need like mental health help. That's what the Penscast group chat looks like. I guess the Penscast the skating penguin. I can only speak to that group chat. Do you guys got a Pensburg group chat? You guys in a text chain?
We did back in like 2017, 2018, 2019. We had a really active group chat between the writers who were there at the time. And so it was me, Mike, Jimmy, Robbie, and Caitlin, who doesn't write there anymore. But that was the core of Pennsburg, and we had that was an incredibly active group chat, but basically filled with the same stuff like memes, maybe some useful information here and there, but mostly memes and talking about like terrible play and like the Penguins losing or that sort of thing. But yeah, that group chat was pretty active. It's not as I mean, the group chat really doesn't exist anymore. If we need to communicate with any other writers on the staff, typically we'll go through like an email chain kind of thing, but that's pretty infrequent. Happens like a couple of times a year.
Dude, speaking to Robbie's answer quick, like the Beatles group chat, I feel like that would either be incredibly boring, like just these like, but at the same time, like imagine like they were living quite large. Like imagine the stories and like the things being sent back and forth for like for those fellas back in the day.
Like I'm a big Beatles fan, so like imagining the Beatles coming over from England into America for the first time and like those guys just texting on the plane and like texting when they land and like seeing all those like the sea of people and like the sea of young girls and teenagers just trying to get a glimpse of them, like that would have to be pretty crazy. And I'm sure they were like I'm sure like the Beatles were close, like a close knit group until they disbanded. So anything that would have been put in a group text probably was discussed out loud between the four of them. But yeah, that would be just to be like a fly on the wall witnessing Beatlemania in the US for the first time would be crazy.
I wonder who was the whipping boy. Who got the most shit? Who would get the most shit in the text chains, like getting chirped out of the Beatles? You think it would be McCartney?
I don't know. I
Or
like
who's the guy who had the what? He died. He had the Asian wife.
John Lennon.
He maybe him because I heard his girlfriend was a ball buster.
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak to or for Yoko Ono or John Lennon. They're like rumors have persisted for what 60 years now that Yoko Ono and like her marriage to John Lennon is the reason the Beatles broke up, and like she was driving a wedge between, because John Lennon and Paul McCartney were the primary songwriters for the Beatles. They wrote like the majority of their catalog, and like all the rumors and shit that like Yoko Ono broke the Beatles up and like her marriage is the reason the Beatles disbanded. It's a bunch of like hearsay and like, did she say this? Did he say this? That sort of thing. I don't know what's true and what's not true. And the fact that uh, two of the four main Beatles are dead now. I mean, and you know who's left? Paul and Ringo. Those are the only two that are left, and they're both in their 80s now. So closer to the end than the beginning for sure.
For sure.
Alrighty, we'll go over to you now, Snail. Question 2 here. I see a lot, this is from Brian. I see a lot of people being negative about losing in overtime or the shootout, but should they look at those games with a more of a positive outlook that at least we got a point out of that game when it was looking like maybe we weren't going to?
Yes, absolutely. That's the one thing that I mutter out of my sad mouth every time they lose in OT. I always say, well, at least they got a point. Even my partner, she even will say before I can, she says, well, at least they got a point. And I'm just like, yes, those points are the only thing keeping the Penguins from being in the same camp as like an Ottawa or a Montreal Canadiens or the Columbus Blue Jackets. Those overtime points, you got to think about it. Like if you lose those or if you leave those points all on the table, we're looking at these Jake Gensel rumors are like probably there's probably a lot more merit to them. It's probably we're actually looking at probably selling off quite a few more pieces maybe at the deadline and getting some assets. It's a much darker place without those points. So as frustrating as it is to see like the disarray and the 3-on-3 overtime that the Penguins put on display, and the shootouts and whatever, I think we all can kind of agree that the shootouts is just a lame way to end a hockey game to determine a winner. So yeah, those points are important. We'd be in a worse place without them. I think everyone can kind of agree, but it's still, Brian, we're still allowed to complain. Like sometimes those games, it's been a tough year, I think, for Penguins fans. So a lot of us got our undies in a bunch, but yeah, I think everyone could agree that at the end of the day, we'll take those points rather than than not having them. All right, Garrett, question 3 for you coming from our pal Kim Larson, and he asks if, and it's a big if, Jake Gensel gets traded, would you look for a young winger for the top six and a young centerman for the second line, and then maybe put Malkin on the third line center as well, or maybe as a winger on the second line? I think he started the year in great shape, but he has struggled lately.
So let's talk about this, Snail. Let's you and I break this down instead of
Okay.
me. Like this might we've been talking about Jake Gensel trade rumors for about a month now, it seems like.
Yep.
And and you just mentioned it there in your question. Here's an issue I have with trading Jake Gensel, where I vocally said on this podcast about a month ago when the Penguins were, losing those games out west. I said, you know what, fine, blow it up, blah 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 blah. Trade Gensel, just throw in the towel on this season. If you trade Jake Gensel now, what kind of return do you think you're realistically going to get? Because you're not going to get a good draft pick. The draft, like if Jake Gensel gets traded, he's not getting traded to a team that has a top 10 draft selection or projected. Like you're going to trade Jake Gensel to a contender. So right there, you're getting probably a late first rounder if Jake Gensel is going to a contender. In terms of the players that you get back, okay, let's look at Kim's question here. Could Jake Gensel realistically get both a young winger and a young center for the second line? Now, I think Jake Gensel is one of the best players in the league, one of the top 10 wingers in the league easily. But what kind of realistically, what is Jake Gensel worth? Is he worth two young players that can immediately slot into your lineup? Because I don't think if you trade Gensel, I don't think you're going to get equal production from any of the parts that you get back in a Gensel trade. Like, but that leads me to my next question: is are trade returns that you get from these big blockbuster trades, do we as fans typically overhype these sorts of things? Like, what was the trade? I feel like there was a trade last year, the year before, where it was a big name player got shipped off somewhere, and the return wasn't as big as maybe people were thinking that it was going to be. I mean, I don't know.
Trying to remember. I
It's a
feel like it goes both ways sometimes. Like I feel like
sometimes yes,
sometimes like like Sean Monahan got a first round pick for him. He's a fourth line center.
yeah. That was part of the argument that I wanted to bring up too, was that you have to, if you're going to make a trade, hopefully you make a trade with a general manager that's, to put it bluntly, dumb enough to give you like a high-end prospect and two NHL ready players and maybe a draft pick for Jake Gensel. That's an absolute haul for Jake Gensel. But then again, like you mentioned, Snail, if Sean Monahan's going for a first round pick, then Jesus, like I want 4 first rounders for Jake Gensel, and I want like 2 ready-made prospects. Like, so the way the trade landscape looks right now, it's rather unpredictable. I tend to think that when I look at trades involving these big blockbuster names, the return is often more underwhelming for said blockbuster player than maybe we originally envisioned. Like, it's easier to swing a big trade like that on the NHL video game than it is in real life, if that makes sense.
For sure. I was just gonna say I was trying to find the source of where I saw this, but I did see it came out of, I believe it was on air, it was on Sportsnet, that the asking price, I believe, for Jake Gensel was a first round pick, first round pick, a young high end prospect, and a roster ready player.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think the traditional like haul for a player like Jake Gensel should be. But after seeing Sean Monahan fetching a first rounder for a fourth line center who's injury prone, he's 29, I don't know. Good player. I mean, if you look at his production over the last few years, I wouldn't have given up a first rounder for that. I don't know how it was. Winnipeg obviously knew what they wanted and they were willing to part with it. Again, they're a great team this year. Their first round pick next year is going to be, it's going to be what, a 28th overall pick, and that's close to a second rounder. The odds of hitting on a game changer, fall drastically after the first, I think, what is it, 5 draft picks, 3 maybe,
Yeah.
in the draft or whatever. So, as far as, I just feel like you said, I just don't know if you're trading Jake Gensel. This team could be, I feel like it's going to be like last year. This team might be fighting for it all the way up until the very last game of the season. And we all remember how that ended last year. If you trade Jake Gensel, I feel like you are robbing Sid and the Penguins of being able to even have a chance at fighting for it up until the last week of the season. You know what I'm saying? I feel like you're waving the white flag. I think you said that. You're waving the white flag. You're throwing in the towel a little bit early. You're playing, I would call it playing it safe. You're covering your ass by getting some assets for Jake, not letting him walk in free agency, whatever. But I also feel like the Penguins situation, it's like they've made their bed and I think they got to hang on to him.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up quickly, this question. If this is a hypothetical, but what if they got rid of Jake Gensel, they're going to get a roster ready player back. And a roster ready player doesn't mean a top 6 player. That means a guy who you can plug in on your roster in some capacity. If they could get a middle 6 center for Jake Gensel, which I don't want them to, dude, is late in their careers, how would you feel about seeing Malkin just becoming one of Sid's wingers? Or vice versa, Malkin becoming the first line center and Sid becoming a winger?
Like, I remember watching the Dan Bilesma Penguins, and I remember like what it would be like late in the period if they needed a goal, or if they were like shorthanded, or there was very select circumstances, but Malkin and Crosby, like Malkin would typically be on Crosby's left wing under those select circumstances.
Yep.
And uh, those circumstances played out pretty well from what I remember. That was, I mean, that's at least a decade ago at this point now. But um, from permanently speaking, like putting Malkin permanently on Sid's wing, assuming Gensel is traded, I don't know. I mean, see, that's why I originally said to trade Gensel, but I've come back around and I've settled down and I said not to trade Gensel because of this very reason. Because Gensel is probably the best winger, maybe outside of Marian Hossa, that short stint that he had with Hossa. Maybe Gensel is probably Sidney Crosby's best winger he's ever played with. So if you trade Gensel, you're not only throwing in the towel and waving the white flag and perhaps already trying to accelerate a rebuild, you're also basically slapping Sidney Crosby in the face and denying him really a chance of competing and playing with more competent players. Because, like you said, Snail, if you bring in a roster ready player, there's no way to determine until the trade is done what kind of player this roster ready player actually is. Is he more of a top 9/bottom 6 player? You know, does more of the value in a Gensel trade come from the high end prospect that may not be NHL ready? I just think it's a disservice to Sidney Crosby at this point in his career. And I'm not saying that Sidney Crosby would play in a different team's uniform. But I mean, I've seen it definitely thrown out there in some of the things I've read that if you do trade Gensel and Sidney Crosby's due for a contract extension, he's eligible to sign a contract extension this upcoming summer. If they trade Gensel, you have to think maybe that becomes a bit more harder to re-sign Crosby, considering that he doesn't have a solid winger like Gensel to play with anymore. It's just a lot of things to think about, and I don't envy the position Kyle Dubas is in, but at the end of the day, given where the Penguins are right now, I think my allegiance would be to Sidney Crosby in the final years of this era, and trying to get together for one more championship run.
Agreed. Yeah, Dubas definitely has quite the he's got this trade deadline is probably turning out to be quite a different scenario than maybe he thought he'd be in when he first took the job in
Yeah, I'm
Pittsburgh.
sure.
And from what I've heard, things are coming out from Toronto about the way that maybe he left things there, and he was getting ready to trade one of their big core pieces up there, and he had tried to already at times, and Brendan Shanahan had maybe stepped in and nixed some trades. So we all know that Dubas, let's just call it, he has a bit of a itchy trigger finger, and as much as I think that they should stick with Sidney Crosby this season and just let if it cap space means everything. If Gensel's gonna leave and he's gonna go get his big payday and he's gonna go win elsewhere, we'll take the cap space, right? Like you need cap space, especially if you're gonna maybe try to keep competing while Sid's still in this window.
Mhm.
But we all know that like I said, Dubas is I don't think he's afraid to make a big move. Like, we know Dubas is not afraid to stick his neck out there and make something big happen. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But I think the consensus is I think it's a tough position to be in, but I think we all kind of want to just keep Jake for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm pretty much firmly in that camp at this point too.
All right, Garrett. We're going over to this would be Robbie's question here. Question number 4 coming from Kim Larson. And he asks, new week, new power play question. Is it time to go with both Letang and Carlson and just 3 forwards on the first unit? On January 23rd, we sit 30th on the PP with 13%. If we don't sort this out now, we are likely to miss the playoffs again. And let's see here. Robbie has an answer for us, and it is, I have been on the fire Reardon train for a while now, but at some point we have to acknowledge that the power play struggles are more than just a system problem. At some point, the players need to shoulder some of the blame. I like taking Carlson and Malkin off the top unit for now in favor of letting Letang run with the first unit, and finding someone who is more willing to shoot the puck. It gets annoying talking about this week in and week out, but until they find some semblance of consistency, it's going to be a main topic. Garrett, do you have any qualms with what Robbie says? Anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think and Snail, you and I talked about the power play on Friday's podcast, I believe, talking about how, you yourself mentioned that Reardon's past history in the NHL has created some very good power play units, going back in his original stint with Pittsburgh through Washington and running that power play through Ovechkin. And I think Robbie's tone would probably fit in line to where you and I are both at this point, where at some point, yeah, we can keep saying fire the coach, fire the coach, fire the coach. But yeah, we're in February now. The season is, we'll say, more than halfway over now that we're past the halfway point. And at some point, yeah, the players need to look themselves in the mirror if they haven't already and say, all right, this is on us as the collective power play 1 and power play 2, because Todd Reardon has an established resume of producing good power play results at the NHL level. And there's no reason, how many times have we said this on a podcast throughout this season? There's no reason with a collective consisting of Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Jake Gensel, Erik Karlsson, Rickard Rakell, Brian Rust, the list goes on and on and on and on. All of these high talented top 6 players, elite players in some cases, are sitting at a power play conversion rate around 13%, where realistically, honestly, given the talent that they should have, it should be about 22, 23%, if I'm being completely honest, given, how much talent is just on this power play unit. And Snail, you mentioned in our last podcast, starting to run the power play through Erik Karlsson and, just let Karlsson sort of be himself the way he was in San Jose. At this point, what else do you have to lose? And I know I also mentioned when we were talking about the power play last podcast about, how much of it is on the players wanting to play tic-tac-toe passing, globetrotter hockey, wanting that perfect highlight reel power play goal, and how much of it can be improved by literally just putting the puck on the net. You hear the cliche all the time, good things come when you get the puck on the net. And I think that rings so true given how good these players are with putting the puck in the net, the goal of the game of hockey. So the fact that they continue to struggle where in an area where they realistically shouldn't be struggling is still a major concern. But, I'd like to see, as we rapidly approach the trade deadline this time next month, the Penguins are back in action tomorrow against the Winnipeg Jets. How different is the power play going to look? How much urgency is there going to be with this team now that we're in the official second half of the season? Kyle Dubas hit that deadline that he said he wanted to wait until the All-Star break to get a gauge on his team. Well, guess what? The All-Star break is in the rearview mirror, and now we are rapidly approaching the trade deadline. So it's make or break time for this team as far as I'm concerned.
Don't worry, Garrett. Jesse Puljujarvi is on the way.
And we will get to that. I believe we have a Puljujarvi question in this week's today's mailbag. If not, let me see. Question 11 from Brian concerns Jesse Puljujarvi. So we will talk about him momentarily, but the Penguins' problems are plentiful, and I don't know if they can be solved with 40 something games remaining.
No, but Sid seems bound and determined to do all that he can and just really try to drag this team by that stitched together jock he still wears to the playoffs again.
Oh, yuck. You're not wrong. He's still wearing that jock, probably from midget hockey.
The forbidden jock, as they call it.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The forbidden jock.
All right, where are we at here on the questions?
We're going back to you.
It's my question. Okay.
Question 5 from Kim Larson. I guess this could be a question for you or I. Have either of you seen the sitcom According to Jim?
I have not.
I have not either.
We were just talking about before we logged on here. We like our TV shows here on this podcast. We like our laughs and entertainment. We love sitting in front of a television. We were talking about Seinfeld. According to Jim, it immediately pops into my head. It's a sitcom, is it not?
Yeah, it was a pretty popular sitcom in the early to mid 2000s. Like Jim Belushi is a really good. He was a good actor, and I mean he is still a good actor. And he was
Jim Belushi's legend.
memorable for his stint on Saturday Night Live as well. So it was just never one of those shows that, like, growing up, it was never on in my house.
Never on in my house either. Hell, I wasn't even watching some of the more popular sitcoms. But sorry, Kim, can't talk on according to Jim. But maybe Robbie has. Maybe we'll shoot Robbie a text here and see if he knows anything about according to Jim. But for now, we'll move on to question number 6. It's going back over to Garrett, and Kim Larson asks if you could change 2 things in PPG Arena, what would you change?
Snail, I immediately thought of you because you haven't been to Pittsburgh. You haven't been inside PPG Paints Arena. The first, maybe the only thing I would change. I remember I was at the home opener against the Blackhawks earlier this season, and Pat Damp and Hunter Hodes, who are with the Locked On, they do the Locked On Penguins podcast. They were at the game as well, and I wanted to meet up with them and, see those guys face to face and talk to them for a few minutes during intermission. Now, we were on opposite ends of the arena. I was in section 228, and I think they were in like section. Hunter was in the lower bowl, and Pat was in like 212. So we're on opposite ends of the arena, and we were getting up to meet each other. I think it was during second intermission. If there's one thing I can change about this arena, it is to have a more functional way to line people up. Like if you're going to the bathroom or getting food at a concession stand, it took me almost the entirety of the intermission to get from my seat at the one end of the arena to walk around to the other end of the arena because I was stuck in a sea of people who were either trying to get beer, nachos, or go to the bathroom. It was just a madhouse trying to walk. And like, it was like, trying to merge onto a busy Los Angeles freeway during rush hour traffic. That's how slow it was. It was awful, an awful experience. There needs to be a better way to sort people, put metal barriers up for a line that leads to the both bathrooms, the men's and women's bathroom. Put a barrier up that strictly separates people who are in line to get beers and nachos and whatnot, so that I can go about my business and wanting to go to the other end of the arena and not having it take 20 minutes to get from one side to the other.
Hey, that's a fair gripe, man. Sometimes the infrastructure within these arenas could have been thought out a lot better, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Snell, you've been to Climate Pledge. I don't know if you've been to any other NHL ready arenas, but are my gripes with PPG Paints Arena similar to some of the things that you've experienced going to some other professional hockey games?
No, I mean, dude, Climate Pledge Arena. I mean, it's crowded. There's a lot of people at these games, but I mean, it's like a free flowing freeway in there. The walkways are massive. The pavilion is easy to navigate. It's just like multiple escalators. They've got elevators going, and yeah, I mean, I have had no gripes since going to Climate Pledge Arena. Even going to WHL games, the minor leagues teams around here. We got pretty good arenas around here. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just, I don't know if that's a Seattle thing. Maybe it's just good luck. I haven't been to the junior barns that are across the state over in the armpits of our state, like Spokane and the Tri Cities. But yeah, I haven't really had too many gripes over here, to be totally honest.
Well, we can't all be as fortunate as Snail living in the glorious Pacific Northwest in the outskirts of Seattle, as I'm still here complaining about my gripes related to PP. And PPG Paints Arena isn't even that old. It's like it opened in
No.
what, 2011, 20 like 20. So it's not even 15 years old, and here I am complaining about how there needs to be a better way to manage people. But
Kim said change 2 things. So you got to bring up what's another gripe you have, just for flavor. Like, what's another thing you don't like about PPG?
what's another thing I don't like about it?
Besides maybe the
Oh,
power play that exists within it.
I'll tell you. The construction it's not directly related to PPG Paints Arena. The construction in and around that part of downtown Pittsburgh is never ending. It's
Oh
it's
God.
awful to get a parking spot like within a decent distance of the arena. Like I'm fortunate because when I go with my dad and a couple of his friends, like they know where the good parking lots are, and like the closer you get to the arena, the more expensive it's going to be for parking. And so you have to sort of time this by the time you leave your house to get down there. You're also combating with rush hour traffic and people wanting to get out of the city because we're typically down there by like 5:30 p.m. Eastern for like a 7 p.m. puck drop. So but my dad knows a lot of the good parking lots that you can get decently priced parking. But yeah, that's another thing. The parking and the construction in and around PPG Paints Arena, it seems like it's never ending, and as a result, it makes for just an awful, awful time for the general population who wants to get in and out of the arena.
What is it with like? Do they do it on purpose when they build these like massive facilities such as a stadium, a ballpark, an arena, a concert hall venue or whatever? Do they purposely make it so that parking is is a nightmare? Do they is this like public transit? Do they have like a stake in this so that you're forced to take public transit and it's a nightmare for people to drive their cars? Like what is with that? It's everywhere.
Pittsburgh is definitely no stranger to those issues. Like I've mentioned before, whether it was off camera or on a podcast with you, Pittsburgh's public transit scene isn't the greatest. So it's either you have a
They definitely have no say in it then.
yeah. You either have a car to get down here, or you're waiting quite a long time to get on a bus or on the light rail and to get into downtown. So um, I don't know. That's a good question, Snail. Like why is it? And like it's not like PPG Paints Arena just came up like was just broke ground like 2 years ago. It's been here for over a decade, almost 15 years, and there's still it's just nonstop construction. Like just outside the arena on some of the major roadways, it really is a hindrance to those who are bringing their own car and finding a place to park.
Yeah, these cities, they're always under some sort of construction, making someone's life hell.
Well, that is 100% accurate. I can tell you that.
All
Alrighty.
right, I think we're at question 7. You want to take this one, Robbie's answer?
Yeah, I'll take question 7. Question 7 comes from Brian. This was for Robbie. Do you think that there's going to be a best on best scenario with the Four Nations face off instead of the All Star game? And Robbie has a very detailed answer here. Question 7. Anything replacing the All Star game is good in Robbie's opinion, but I think we need to be clear that this idea that the NHL came up with is in no way a best on best tournament. Robbie understands the geopolitical reasons for excluding the Russians, but there is a way to allow them to participate without wearing the crest or waving the Russian flag. Bring back Team North America as well, in parentheses, or some kind of under 23 team that includes Europeans to play. You can argue for the likes of Germany, Switzerland, Norway, etc., but most of those pros play overseas, and I wonder how willing their teams are to release them mid-season and send them to North America for a competition that means pretty little. Also, apparently, the NHL is planning an All-Star Game send-off before the 2026 Olympics, which is maybe the single dumbest idea the league has ever concocted, which is a high bar to clear for the NHL, but they damn well are going to try. So Robbie came out swinging with that answer, a loaded one for sure. Uh, talking about that all Snail, have you read into this? The All Star game that the league wants to have before sending the players off to play in the Olympics, the 2026 Olympics. Have you read into that?
So I have not. The first I'm hearing of this is reading Robbie's answer, and so they want to have an All Star game before they go to play in the Olympics.
Yes.
Like, I mean, there was $1 million pot for the best player in this All Star game, and you like Nikita Kucherov could not have been even bothered. Like, if you want to see like the amount of disinterest in this All Star game
Yep.
before the send off, I mean, you're just asking for. Players are going to put their hand up and say, "Check, please. I will take my game suspension. I will."
Yep.
You're going to be having
Yep.
bottom six players and backup goalies in this
Yep.
All Star game send off. So that's just ridiculous. I can't. I mean, the NHL I love how Robbie. I mean, he's almost sounds like he has a vendetta with Gary Bettman himself. Like I love how candid he is with his just. I don't want to say maybe hatred, but yeah, like his spitefulness towards the NHL. But this is completely warranted. I think this is like this will be a painful event for people in attendance as well as those
Yep.
who for some reason want to watch at home.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Kucherov's performance on Twitter and how he went viral for all the wrong reasons for how little he cared about the whole thing. And if you think for 1 second that these players, a lot of whom have been fighting, begging for the chance to go represent their countries at the Olympics, are going to give anything close to an effort for this sham of an all-star game in 2026, you have another thing coming. Like these players, they rightfully so get up when they get up and they are competitive. They are intense when it comes to international hockey and representing their countries. If you think for a second that you're going to see that sort of level of intensity before the Olympics are played in this sham all-star game, I mean, you're barking up the wrong tree because it's just not going to happen. If you thought what Kucherov did this year was bad, just wait until 2026 before that Olympic Games, and you'll see everyone involved is just going to be gliding around on their skates, not trying a single bit.
I wouldn't be surprised if some players are just like, I forgot my skates.
Yeah, honestly, like that's a bogus excuse and obviously makes no sense. But I would be if I was in one of their shoes, I'd be saying the same exact thing. I forgot my skates. I forgot my stick. I can't play. Like you said, Snail. I'll just take my 1 game suspension, and well, I'll see all the rest of my Canadian brothers or my Russian brothers or my German brothers at the Olympic Games, and that'll be that.
So one thing that it not to get too like into the weeds here about maybe like conspiracies or whatever, but is this like Bettman being like, you can have the you can have the Olympics, but guess what, you're showing up for an all-star game to put some asses in some seats and make me some corporate money?
You know what?
Because all the best players that are going to the Olympics are going to be the same players that should be in the all-star game.
The owners have for a long time wanted to keep their players on their teams out of the Olympics. And I'm not typically one for conspiracy theories, but you put two and two together here, it makes some sense on the surface that, Bettman at the end of the day is a puppet for the 32 owners in the NHL. He's going to do what they want. Maybe this is the owners saying, okay, you want Olympic participation, like you said, Snail. You're going to generate us some more revenue before we let you go over and play in the 2026 games. And potentially, there's a real possibility that some of those star players get injured in the Olympic Games. That's why the owners have been so against their players going over there and playing Olympic hockey, because of that injury risk that comes with their, I don't want to label players as property or investments, but if Sidney Crosby tears his ACL during the Olympics, well, then the Penguin season is over, because that's how much Sidney Crosby means to the Penguins. So from the owner's perspective, I can see them why they'd be hesitant to send their players over there, but I can also see it from the players' perspective. A lot of them, the vast majority of them, are incredibly prideful athletes who want to represent their country on an international stage. So I can see both sides of the coin, but in regards to this all-star send-off before the Olympics, I would not be surprised if that was like a caveat that had to be included. You want to go to the Olympics? Fine, but you're, like you said, you're going to generate
showing
us
up, you're kissing babies, you're making us some dough.
Yep, and then you can go and hopefully not tear your ACLs.
Hopefully. Sid'll be 38, right? At that
Yes.
point.
Yes.
You think he's a lock? You think he'll make the Olympic team?
He came out and said, he was asked about it during a media scrum over the All-Star break. He said, yeah, he is absolutely interested. He absolutely wants at least one more go around in the Olympics. Is he a lock? I think he could. I mean, we're talking about 2 years from now. And, 2 years ago, I didn't think Alex Ovechkin's production would drop off as sharply as it has.
Oh, man, did he drop off.
So, is it a possibility that by the time he's 38, that Crosby's production has something of a similar drop off? I think at the end of the day, because Crosby is one of Canada's most decorated ever Olympians, he's probably a lock, probably going to be a third or fourth line center in some sort of capacity. So I think he is going to go because it's Sidney freaking Crosby. But,
Yeah.
maybe
He's
just keep
Canadian royalty. I just
yeah, that's why, you don't
and I
score
feel
the
like his game too, like, he's good down low below the dots. He's defensively minded. Like, it'd be like signing like Joe Thornton, or like not signing, but bringing Joe Thornton in his late age into onto an Olympic team, or like for whatever, like a not a Canada Cup, but the World Cup or something like that.
yeah.
He's just a vet, been there, done that, captain, leadership, good defensively. Put him on a fourth line with some offensive minded players and work below the dots behind the net and stuff. I think, what team wouldn't want that?
Yeah, I think by the time 2026 rolls around, even if his statistics and play say that he may not be deserving of a spot, I think because, like you said, he is Canadian royalty, the golden goal, the golden child of Canada, because of the goodwill that he has, given Canada and everything that he's given Canada throughout his entire professional career. At the very least, I think he's just going to go based on that, based on the goodwill that he has created over the course of his career. But, I think by the time that rolls around in 2 years, I think his play will still be at a high enough level to where I think he is deserving of a roster spot.
I think we all agree.
All righty, what question are we on now?
8.
Question 8. All right, this is your question, Snail. This is a good question to ask because I have a very definitive answer for this. Brian asks, is Pittsburgh part of the Midwest? Snail, as a Pacific Northwesterner, do you view Pittsburgh as part of the Northwest or
So
the Northwest or Midwest? I'm sorry, Midwest.
definitely not the Northwest, but I my first candid thought was yes, but then I was like, well, I maybe I thought too hard about this because I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong, but does Philadelphia have a coastline on the Atlantic?
Oh boy, my geography is not good.
No, New Jersey blocks them. I have a
Yes, yeah,
map pulled up here.
you're right.
So I thought that because initially I thought maybe because if Pennsylvania had a coastline, it can't be the Midwest, but it does have it has a border with Ohio, and I consider Ohio the Midwest. So it shares a border with Ohio, but maybe it's too close to the coast to be the Midwest. I was going to say it is. I was going to say, so the question actually says Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is on the western side of Pennsylvania. It's right there next to like Akron, Ohio, isn't it? Or like Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland is about 3 hours from Pittsburgh.
It's close, but it's not. And I had to look this up to be sure. And there's a map laid out right here in front of me. Pennsylvania is one border away from being in the south. It's technically in the northeast, and it shares a border with the Midwest. I always thought the Midwest was the Great Lakes region, and when people would say that like Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri is the Midwest, I was like, this goes to show my geography. I'm like, isn't that like the South? Isn't that like the prairies maybe? I don't even know if the United States technically has does the United States have prairies? I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyways, this is about Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is in the Northeast. It's not in the Midwest, but it's really kind of in like the Bermuda Triangle of like where the regions all kind of connect. But I'm from the Northwest. What do I know? I only know so much, and it's mostly about my region. Garrett, I think this is a better question for you to chime in on. Do you feel do you feel like a Midwesterner?
No, absolutely 100% not. I
Hmm.
have always taken the stance that Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, for that matter, is part of the Northeast. Ohio I consider Ohio Midwest, and like you said, the Great Lakes region, I also consider that Midwest. Nebraska, all those states that you mentioned, I also consider the Midwest. Ohio, for me, is the eastern, I'll say the eastern most part that you can be considered Midwest, in my opinion. I consider Pittsburgh to be part of the metropolitan northeastern area that includes New York and all the New England states. I You're never going to convince me otherwise. But I like how you describe Pittsburgh as like the Bermuda Triangle of like connecting the Midwest of Ohio, the South of West Virginia, the North of New York and the New England states, and to the east it's Philadelphia. And yeah, so I like how you describe that there. But no, for me, Pittsburgh is 100% a part of the northeastern territory of the United States.
Yeah, I sometimes when I'm looking at Pittsburgh, I'm like it I feel like it's when I think of the Northeast, I think of like gnarlier winters, humid summers, and I think of more like metropolitan type like really urban areas. And Pittsburgh seems to, I mean, downtown Pittsburgh seems to be everything that you'd get in a northeastern city, but like the outskirts of Pittsburgh, like I assume that there's a lot of like real tree camo, tractors maybe on the highway at times. It's right there next to like Maryland, and I know that like Maryland's like quite rural, other than maybe like Baltimore. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass, and I have no
No, you're
idea
right.
what the East Coast is, right? But I think I've asked you guys about this a little bit too. Like, isn't Pittsburgh like the city is like a very like it's a blue dot, right? It's a real
Yes.
city,
Yeah.
and then outside of it, it gets very, as I say, yeehaw.
Yes, it is incredibly yeehaw. Outside of the city of Pittsburgh itself, and maybe there's some of the surrounding area in Allegheny County, it is. I live in yeehaw country. I'm pretty sure Brian lives in yeehaw country. Yeah, it is very much yeehaw around here. Outside of Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, Erie, and Philadelphia.
Garrett, do you have an appreciation for the Midwest?
I don't care about. To me, the Midwest. When I think of the Midwest, you know what I think of? I think of one long connecting road, and on both sides of that road are fields of corn, and that's literally
Really?
yeah.
Hmm.
That's it.
I think of Midwest emo, and I have like it paints a picture in my head of what these. I think of like Minnesota and like Michigan, and but that's, I mean, that could be its own. That's like the Great Lakes region. Like I think it's, I don't know if there's a,
You could say that's its own region. The Great
yeah.
Lakes region is its own region. Yeah, yeah.
I like that. I don't really like the idea of cornfield. I think of Iowa. I think of that
Yes,
band Slipknot, and I think of this. I just think of like Field of Dreams. Like
yes. That's what I
no,
think of too. Yeah,
no thanks. Miss me with all of that.
yeah. I'm not a fan. I'd much rather be in an urban city like setting.
Yes, I would even take Yeehaw without like no cornfields, but like some woods. Give me some hills. Give me some
Sure.
creeks. Maybe a lake, a pond.
Yeah.
I'm all for that. But miss me with the cornfields. All right. This question's going over to you, Garrett, and it comes from Brian. Uh, he says, I know Garrett is a wrestling nerd. So what does he think of these accusations against Vince McMahon? Garrett, I saw you had a tweet kind of regarding this topic, and I know that Vince McMahon he's got a spotlight on him, and it's not for the reasons he wishes it was. So why don't you break it down for us?
No, I think I am no wrestling podcaster, but I read the 67-page complaint that was part of the lawsuit against Vince McMahon. And if you haven't read it, boy, it is incredibly graphic, assuming that these accusations are true and have weight to them. And I am inclined to believe the victim here, the Janelle Grant, who is the woman that is accusing McMahon of these things. Uh, Boy, some of those text messages that McMahon allegedly sent to Janelle Grant, the woman in this case, holy moly, were they incredibly graphic. Things that I am absolutely not going to repeat on this podcast. But boy, oh boy, McMahon has long had skeletons in his closet. He's just been able to keep them buried underneath the ground for a long period of time. And it seems like because even going back to the 90s, Vince McMahon in the Hulk Hogan steroid trial, I think he really didn't face too much punishment from that. He was able to bounce off of it and sort of rebuild his reputation. And even a couple of years ago, I remember he took something of a leave of absence as the chairman of the WWE, but even then, he weaseled his way back into his company once the media attention and the media circus sort of died down. Because in 2022, I believe that's when this story really started to gain traction. He was accused of making or of sending hush money payments to several women in exchange for sexual favors. And so that was the first time that, well, not the first time, that was the most recent time that McMahon's name had been intertwined with these sort of nasty rumors. But he has faced accusations of sexual assault and rape going back into the 1980s. Uh, Now in 2024, fast forward to 2024, and McMahon has since resigned from his post of this new company that they created between the WWE and the UFC. He is completely out of the public picture. Well, he's not out of the public picture. I should say he's out. He wants to be out of the public eye. He has nothing to do with the WWE anymore. And I think this lawsuit against McMahon, should it go to court, which I think it may, I don't know if a settlement is going to be reached. But boy, if this ends up going to court, McMahon could be in some big, deep doo doo, because some of the things that I was reading regarding this lawsuit are incredibly graphic, and I think a lot of the skeletons in McMahon's closet are, finally being pushed out of the door, for lack of a better term. It
Dude,
is.
I just read, so I just glossed over a few of these texts or whatever that old Vinny boy were sending, and oh my god, that
Yes.
is like uh I don't know, that's like it's vulgar to say the least.
And here's the
And I
thing.
have a high tolerance for that kind of stuff. I think Garrett and I both have a, you know,
Yeah. Like,
we can be vulgar to each other, but in like, in like good fun. This
yes.
is like, oh my god, how I'm cringing thinking about this full-grown man texting this out to somebody with I don't know, some of the misspellings and like I'm just like, this is really, I'm like secondhand embarrassed for this
And
guy right now.
here's the kicker. She was in her like 30s, I think, early 30s, mid 30s. He's like 78 years old sending these messages to her. He's like 45 years older than she is, because those text messages, the allegedly those text messages are from like 2019, like 2020. So they're recent, up until like 2022. Those are recent text messages.
Who
That's
taught
a
him how to text like that?
he does text like a boomer, doesn't he? I was reading through. I was struggling trying to decipher some of those text messages. Uh, God,
Some
yeah,
of
he
it was written like a naughty email.
yes, yeah. It it's just, McMahon should go to prison just for his text etiquette.
Oh God, yeah, that's tough. So I guess pretty serious stuff. I love the Vince McMahon meme of him, doing the like crying and like
Yeah,
the.
yeah, yeah.
I love that, and now I don't know. Maybe I'll be a little bit hesitant to use him in any context because that's some troubling stuff for old Vinny boy.
Yeah, I don't think he is going to escape it without some sort of public downfall, and you're already starting to see it. I know a couple of people who are in that sort of wrestling circle who are plugged in, and more plugged in than I am, and boy, a lot of that stuff is incredibly damning for McMahon, and like for WWE and the public relations debacle that they have to go through now. But I'm it's just bad altogether. Just awful, awful, awful stuff.
Awful stuff. Um, Well, that's too bad. I never was a WWE fan, but I always had like an appreciation for the entertainment value it provided.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I was actually just telling my buddy a story. I lived in Portland for a summer, and uh, I rented a room in downtown Portland, and one of my buddies from back home, he came to visit, and we got it was a weekend. I think we went to a strip club, and then we continued drinking, and it was 3 in the morning when we finally got home, and we were watching WWE highlights, and I got in so much trouble from my roommate because it was like 3:30 in the morning, and we were like imitating WWE wrestlers, and like I just remember being the jig was up when like my buddy was on the floor pretending to be a referee doing the countdown, and I'm like screaming it's stone cold and like suplexing a pillow onto a sleeping bag on like a hardwood floor, and it was just like my roommate was just like, this is absolutely unacceptable. So I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I have a huge appreciation for it, and it's a good time.
Yeah, it's a really good time, but this is definitely not one of those like this is going to cast a dark cloud over professional wrestling for the foreseeable
It's
future.
too bad too, because Vince McMahon was like hilarious. I remember like he's pretty funny. He's like the commissioner, right, of WWE.
He was the in real life he was the because it was a publicly traded company. He was the executive chairman of their board, but he also created a TV character. That's where like he really came into the public eye as this evil TV boss, Mr. McMahon, and like his feud with Stone Cold in the late '90s kickstarted another really boom period for professional wrestling, what they call the Attitude Era. But
So
yeah, it
what
was.
about the? Could you touch lightly? Isn't there like some clips of WWE? I believe it's this character you're describing that Vince McMahon created, and like him and Donald Trump are like going at it.
Yes, yes. That was WrestleMania 23, I think. That was back in like 2000. I want to say 2006 or 2007. But yeah, he and Donald Trump are probably still very close friends, if not acquaintances, close friends. Vince McMahon's wife, Linda, took a position in Donald Trump's
His cabinet.
his cabinet. Yeah, she took a cabinet position
Dude,
while
dude,
he was president.
the United States is just like we're a reality show over here, aren't we?
It's a circus. It really
It's
is
a
a circus.
circus. Now that Vince McMahon's catching a case and he's in a lot of trouble and has a horrible shadow cast over him, maybe you'll see him running with Donald, old Donny Boy.
Could you imagine with like Trump's reelection and like having Vince McMahon as his like vice presidential candidate?
Trump McMahon for 2020, whatever.
2020, and like they're both the same age. I think they're both like 78, 79. Oh, dude. Like, not to get too political, I just even for the Democrats, even on the Democrat side, like these are the two best candidates you can bring out, two 78, 79-year-old
I
men.
know. It's just like, dude, again, we live in like a circus reality TV show over here, and we should move on before we say something that gets us in some sort of trouble.
Probably. And with that, we will move on. Snail, do you want to take Robbie's question 10?
Yes, I'll take question 10 here. Coming from Brian again, he asks, would you be disappointed if the traveling Jaegers weren't in attendance for Jaeger's jersey retirement ceremony? And Robbie has to say here, have to think they'll be there. No, assuming they all can make the trek. There's going to be a lot of big names in town for this, so why not include them as well? And Gary, I mean, come on, like those traveling, the Jaegers or the Jagers, whatever, they made a lot of treks, and I just don't believe that making it to Pittsburgh is out of the question for them. I look forward to seeing them in attendance. In fact, if there is any question that they maybe aren't able to make it, get a GoFundMe up and get those guys to Pittsburgh because they need to be there.
It is a tremendous group of fans who are incredibly dedicated to their craft. I respect everything that the traveling Yoggers do, and like Robbie and you say, I I don't really see a scenario in which they aren't there unless like travel costs are so sky high. But like you said, Snail, let's start a GoFundMe because I'm sure members of Penguins Twitter would easily fund the traveling Yoggers to Pittsburgh if they couldn't get here. But yeah, I like Robbie and you say there's almost no way they aren't there for the ceremony because Yager has taken pictures with them in the past before, so he knows who they are. And some people in the NHL know who they are too. They're a very popular fan group. I just don't see how
Oh
they
yeah.
wouldn't be there.
No, they have to be there. And in fact, I think that it's almost like with this new regime in at Pittsburgh, this what are they? I always forget what they're called.
Fenway
F-
Sports Group.
Fenway Sports Group. These nerds that take over the Penguins, it is their duty to make sure that they are there. And they have deeper pockets than we probably are all privy to knowing. We all know that they have their hands tied in some very successful, big money generating sports teams and groups or whatever. It's if there is any chance that they're not going to be there, it is their duty to make sure that they're there. Plain and simple.
I agree. I agree 100%. With that, we will go to question 11. Now, this is your question, Snail. Here we are talking about Jesse Puljujarvi and his official signing. Brian says, no surprise on the Puljujarvi signing. The contract is favorable, 2 years at a cap hit of $800,000 per season. That definitely carries some potential upside. Snail, where do you think Puljujarvi is going to slot in?
This is, I mean, uh, this just goes to show where the Penguins are kind of at right now, that this signing is like a massive deal. And before I get into where I think he should slot, I think we really need to look at like realistically, like what are the Penguins getting in a Jesse? I think it's his name is actually pronounced Jesse Puljujarvi, um, Jesse Puljujarvi, whatever. This guy was drafted really high. One of the Oilers, high draft picks that they had during at the beginning of the Connor McDavid era there, and he lights up any other league that he's in except the NHL. When he was playing over in, I forget which Euro League it was, I think during like the COVID season or something, the player over there that's the highest scoring player wears a flame helmet and flame jersey, like it looks like he's on fire. He was wearing that like the majority of the time he was there. The AHL, he's is I don't think he's quite a point a game, but he's definitely, for a guy coming off double hip surgery, he's looking pretty good down in Wilkes-Barre. The NHL is just, he's had a hard time figuring out the NHL, and that he was playing with a lot of good players, just like he will be in Pittsburgh. He was playing on Connor McDavid's line at time. He was playing on Leon Draisaitl's line at times. There were times where he was down on the fourth line and he was, down on himself. I think he had a little bit of maybe a bruised ego at times, maybe feeling the heat of underperforming in a Canadian market. I think we can all agree that even from just being a Pittsburgh Penguin fan, we know that it's not exactly super easy for some players to play with superstar players like a Sidney Crosby or an Evgeny Malkin. It takes the right kind of player. With all of that said, I got to admit I'm a little excited that this kid's coming over. It's like the Penguins have, they don't have a lot of youth in their system right now. They're getting a high draft pick guy. He does well in every other league he plays in. He's a big body. The Penguins need a big body. I'm pretty excited for this signing. It's a pretty favorable contract, as he said. I believe it's $800K prorated for 2 years. So this year prorated, and then next season $800K. Not a it's a low risk, high reward type of deal. Where I would like to see Puljujarvi slotted, I think you got to give him. I think you got to approach this almost in the same way that they went about dealing with Kapanen when he actually came back to Pittsburgh. He never played a game for Pittsburgh when they kind of first drafted him. He went to Toronto, I believe, in the Phil Kessel trade, and when they got him back, they were kind of experimenting around with him. I want to see how this guy plays on Sid's line. Sid had a little bit of high praise for him when asked about him. Said he's a big body, he's hard to move off the puck. I think at times they wanted Jesse Puljujarvi to be more of a perimeter player, maybe a half wall guy. The way that Sid and Jake like to play, they like to play down low behind the net, below the dots. I want to see how Jesse fits in with that Sid line. And if not, I mean, big body. I want Sullivan to get in his ear and make him the next Patrick Hornquist with that frame. And we know he's got skill. Like, we know he has finesse at times. He can put the puck in the net. I want him to be given a chance net front, getting in front of the goalie's eyes, creating some havoc in front of the net, and just pick up loose change around the net and bang in some greasy goals when shots come in from the D or the point or the perimeter or whatever. That's where I would personally like to see him. Garrett, I guess I want to invite you to chime in. Where are you at with the Puljujarvi signing, and how are you envisioning the Penguins and Sullivan slotting him in this lineup?
I think the third line right now. I was looking at some projected line pairings from Seth Rorabaugh. He's a beat writer here in Pittsburgh for the Penguins. I looked at one of his tweets earlier today. He is projected right now on the third line with Lars Eller, and I forget who's Lars Eller. Lars Eller's typical left winger. He was on.
O'Connor.
O'Connor was on the second line with Malkin,
Oh,
in
that's right. Riley Smith's hurt, so would it be Harkins?
maybe it was Harkins. Either way, for in terms of Puljujarvi, he was on the third line on the right wing next to Lars Eller. I think that's a good place to start him off at. I think this is a low risk, medium to high reward signing for the Penguins. I don't expect Puljujarvi to come in here and score 30 goals, especially given the surgery he's coming off of. The his play sort of dipped in his final years with Edmonton and mixing that with Carolina, I think in 2022, 23. So the offense kind of dried up a little bit, but it can't be any worse. I mean, given some of the names the Penguins have recycled in and out of their bottom six this year, I think Puljujarvi is a good value signing. I think he has really worked his way back, and given his production in the AHL with the AHL Penguins, at the very least, I mean, given his cap hit, $800,000, I don't know if it's a one-way or a two-way deal. I'm assuming it's a two-way deal. I could be wrong, though. I don't know those specifics, but just because of the cap hit, the generous cap hit at $800,000, I think this could end up benefiting the Penguins in more ways than one. I think we should give Puljujarvi, because the AHL is not the NHL, vice versa, however you want to say it. Give Puljujarvi, 5 to 10 games. Don't make any drastic conclusions when you see him tomorrow against the Winnipeg Jets. But I think over the course of the second half of this season, I think Puljujarvi could be one of the Penguins' better bottom six players. And if necessity calls for it, put Puljujarvi up on Malkin's wing or Crosby's wing and experiment with that.
I agree. I think that yeah, I think you're going to see some mixed reactions to this. I think people in Edmonton are saying good luck, this guy stinks. I think that there's when he was kind of rumored to be on the trade block and maybe not in a favorable standing out in Edmonton, there was a lot of fans of other teams licking their chops, hoping that they could maybe get him in with their organization and maybe their coach or other players could unlock something in him that clearly a lot of people saw when he was picked so high. I think he was like a fourth overall pick, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to finally get some Penguins hockey back on TV. This last break, this All-Star break was kind of boring, and yeah, a little bit of juice and excitement to see their new player suit up for the Pens in Winnipeg. Is it in Winnipeg or is it in Pittsburgh?
Well, let's Google it. Because I don't know.
Oh, it's 7 p.m. Eastern. It's in Pittsburgh, I think.
Pittsburgh then, yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty, let's move on to our last question here, Garrett. For this question's going over to you, and it's actually it's more of Brian talking that shit. Uh, Brian says, "Call me demented all you want, but clearly you have never experienced a runner's high. Maybe if you left the basement, you could get that experience one day. But depending on how many miles I walked for work, depending on how much on how much I jogged, I like to get 25 to 30 miles in a day. As far as the monetary aspect of walking, they already have it. It's called the United States Postal Service."
All right. So, Snail, and unmute yourself because you're going to be part of this conversation
No,
too.
I'm here with you.
So let's break this down here. I went on record calling Brian demented on our last podcast because of how much he wanted to run after getting an 8-hour shift in of work, assuming he was at the time working for the U.S. Postal Service. But Snail, let's take a look at this question one more time, shall we?
Yeah,
The
I
the
got it right
second
here.
the second line of this question, uh, it, this sentence, it's a couple words. I like to get 25 to 30 miles in a day.
Dude, that's literally like from where my house is right now, downtown Seattle, the Space Needle is about 12 miles away, and that is a 25-minute car ride. So I'm thinking about just walking from here to the Space Needle. Dude, like I couldn't like my feet, my knees, dude, my hips. I just don't think I could do that. What about like what if I got hungry or thirsty? Like and you double that. Like it's like I might as well be walking to the Seattle Tacoma International Airport.
I think
It,
keep going, Snail. I want to look something up here. The distance
it's
from my house to Pittsburgh. Let me see something. Uh,
dude, 25 to 30 miles at it's is it 60 miles an hour? That should take you a half an hour. Like that distance walking it's just not feasible for a guy like myself. And you know, I'm an active guy. Like you know, Garrett, you have the reputation here. The second line of this, maybe if you left the basement, I I I don't know how active you are in actuality in your daily life, but like I can say for myself, I'm a pretty active guy. And Brian and we're flow bros here. uh, I'm like I work a blue collar job. Like my knees, like we're joking around on our mailbags here that we're both going to be needing knee replacements here before we hit 40. 25 to 30 miles for me. Brian, unless you're built like a gazelle, like I am not. My body, my construction and DNA pattern was like this guy is not made to run. This guy is made to uh do a lot of other things, but definitely running is not something that in my DNA uh my code, my the infrastructure of my body was not made for running, and so it's just not feasible for a guy like myself to even be thinking about doing that. I'm exhausted thinking 25 to 30 miles. Like,
so I could definitely stand to be more active. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that, you know, the carbohydrates and me get along just fine, if you know what I'm talking about. You know, I've had my fair share of pierogies and buffalo chicken pizza. I'm not gonna. I could definitely stand to exercise more. That I'm acutely aware of. Snail, I was curious. I wanted to get an estimation, a close estimation of the distance between my house and PPG Paints Arena. The distance from my house to PPG Paints Arena is roughly 28 miles. So, and it would, so, I mean, I guess it lines up. If Brian walks walks slash runs, it would take, according to Google Maps, it would take me roughly 10 hours and 29 minutes to walk from my house to PPG Paints Arena. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he goes for 25. I mean, because if you're working for USPS and
you're not. I mean, it's more than an 8 hour day. Like that.
for sure, yeah, like, and I'm not sure how big his mail route is, so it could definitely he definitely could be burning those calories and walking slash running in any given day for sure. I mean, he's still demented. Don't get me wrong.
I don't think that there's any fibbing or Like Brian, like, dude, we practically know this guy. Like he's like he's might as well be like a distant cousin of mine because I know so much about him now at this point from mailbags. I don't doubt him for one single moment that this guy is a lunatic when it comes to walking and running. And it totally lines up with it, like a 10 hour, like if it would take 10 hours to walk from your house to PPG Paints Arena, this guy's logging probably an 8 to 10 hour day. And mailmen don't necessarily leisurely stride the sidewalks. They have a little bit of giddy up in their step. They're on a mission. They're determined. They're trying to get this mail delivered. They're also carrying around a Santa sack full of mail. I don't know. Part of me is, yes, demented, wanting to run and get that experience, that runner's high after logging those kinds of hours. That is demented to a guy like me. I don't know. It's like I don't understand it, but Brian must be like us. He built like a Greek god.
Honestly, yeah, like I call Brian demented, and I'm obviously going to stand behind my statement. He is a demented human being, but at the same time, I will say I have to respect the hustle and the grind.
Respect, yes,
because I could not be a mail carrier given my physical stature and physical limitations. I have to imagine this guy's cardio has to be like next level. So from that perspective, I got to respect Brian for what he does. At the same time, after working an 8-hour shift, largely walking all day and delivering your Santa sack full of mail, to continue to want to go out and exercise, that's where that's where the being demented comes into play, because
Yes.
after working 8+ hours on your feet, you still want to go and get that runner's high. That is just like, that's taking it to like an alien level of like cardio, dedication, whatever you want to call it. Brian is still demented, but I absolutely respect the hell out of him, because I could never do that in a million years.
But then he goes and runs, and then the next day he's got to get up at the
He's
ass
got to do
crack
it
of
again.
dawn
He's got to do it again, for assuming, I don't know what his shift,
until he's 65 years old.
I mean, look, I know some 65-year-olds who love to stay in shape and do that sort of thing, but yeah, I mean, that is just like next level dedication to the craft that I don't have.
When are they going to let USPS guys, and Brian, you should write into us and let us know if you'd be in favor for this. I see these down in our city. I don't know if they have them in Pittsburgh, but in Seattle they've got the Lime bikes and the Lime scooters.
They don't
Uh,
have them where I live, but
really?
I wouldn't be surprised if they have them in more populated metro areas, like in and around Pittsburgh.
I live 25 minutes outside of downtown Seattle, and there are Lime scooters up in. You'll see one parked right next to a bus stop up here, in a driveway. Even someone took it home, probably half in the wrapper from the night before. But when are they going to let you guys start riding those things around? And if they did, if you were allowed to have like a Segway or an electric scooter or a Lime bike, would you ride the Lime bike to deliver your mail, or this is where we'll find out if he's a lunatic or not. Would you opt to walk those
Well,
miles still?
here's the thing. This is where pride comes into the equation now. I mean, it was
Right.
it was it's right, because it's one thing to, have to do that for your job, have to walk those miles to deliver mail. But now, let's say that you're Brian and you're given an electric scooter. Are you too prideful in your work to say, no, I don't need this electric scooter. I am fit. I am a fit young man, and I will deliver this mail the way God intended, on my feet.
Exactly.
So, that's a good thing. That's a good question to bring up for either when Brian hears this. I'm assuming he's going to hear it Tuesday when he's delivering his mail. Maybe he'll give us another question for Thursday, if not Thursday next week, for next week's mailbag. But now you see, you're bringing pride into the equation, Snail, and pride is a very, very strong feeling
It
for
is. It's a
men. Like,
potent drug, yeah.
yes, absolutely. So that I'm curious, that's going to be our cliffhanger, because that's the last question of this mailbag, and until we get to part 2 later in the week, we're sort of left on a cliffhanger. Will Brian, would he accept an e-scooter for his job delivering mail for the post service?
Because I could understand going and running. If you like running and you go and deliver mail on an e-scooter all day, yeah, sure, go burn some energy off or whatever. If he explained to us the runner's high is something, just a phenomenal thing that he likes to experience. I could actually understand that. But I guess we'll find out what kind of man Brian really is, and I'm sure he'll let us know on Twitter. And if he doesn't, then we'll get to the bottom of this eventually.
Yeah, what kind of man are you really, Brian? That's gonna be the question that I'm gonna leave with you and the rest of our listeners for this podcast, for Snail, for Robbie, who was not here with us, but should be here later in the week. I have been Garrett Bahana. Thank you so much for listening to another wacky edition of the Skating Penguin Network Mailbag, and we will talk to all of you again very soon.